Following the wisdom of God, life is great. Nothing ever goes wrong. I'm busy watching this series called The Vikings. Don't eat while you're watching it, but throughout it, no matter what god they worshipped, all the different gods that were presented, every one of them depicted, if you didn't do it right, you'd be punished. It was as simple as that. And they would pray for victories, and victories were killing as many of your enemies as you could. That was what life was about. You know, God forbid you were a woman during that time. It was awful. So Judges is like it just takes right there. I mean, we got this wonderful enemy called the Philistines. You guys know Philistines are throughout the Old Testament. The Philistines are thoughts that are disobedient to God. It's real simple. So every time the Israelites were disobedient to God, they'd be captured by the Philistines for another 400 years. It's just like a routine theme throughout the Old Testament. So this particular portion of Judges, chapters 13 through 16, is no exception to any of that. It starts out with the Israelites are disobedient again, and they're punished by being in captivity to the Philistines for another 40 years, 400 years. It was always a lot of years. And it was forever that the Israelites, until they came to a place where they recognized that they were being disobedient and they needed to come back to God. We all know that feeling. When that happened, then the angel of the Lord would speak to somebody. And that was the routine throughout the Old Testament. So Judges' point, there's many, many chapters in Judges, but that was the point of Judges. They judged you. And there were judges around the captivities that would judge you. And you would go see the judge and you would be given the punishment. That's how it was, and the punishment was always severe because you were disobedient to God. That's it. So here we start with Judges, and this is the book, this is all about Samson, right? Samson the Great, a big burly guy. I can imagine him being 6'9", 350 pounds, you know, that kind of a guy. But before he was born, his parents went through a long period where they could not conceive. Sounds like Moses. Couldn't conceive. But the angel of the Lord comes down to his soon-to-be mother and says, don't sweat the small stuff, you're going to conceive. But there's a couple of things you need to do before that'll happen. You must give up drink. That meant all alcohol, the wines before dinner, you know, and there was always a brew of something cooking, and she was asked to stay away from all of that and to never cut her son's hair. Right, who knew? So as moves on, she tells her husband this, and he's like, okay, we may have some problems here. The angel of the Lord spoke to her, didn't speak to me, that guy can't be right. So they're out in the field, and the angel of the Lord appears to him. Actually, appears to her, and she runs and gets him and says, look, the angel of the Lord has come back to me. And it's in a human form. And so her husband is like, what do you got? If you're an angel of the Lord, and he reiterates what needs to happen in order for this child to be conceived. And he believes that this can't be God because it was in a human form. And so he does a sacrifice, which, big deal, you know, another goat down the drain, or it was a human, depending on who you were worshiping. So he grabs a goat and prepares this bonfire as a sacrifice because the angel of the Lord has spoken to him. It's his way of saying, I got it, I heard you, and this is my thanks to you. I'm going to do this sacrifice. And so in the process, the angel of the Lord dissipates right into the fire and gone. And that's when he really gets it, that in fact this was the angel of the Lord. So they go about the business of conceiving Samson, and he's born. And I can imagine, and the Judges doesn't talk about this, but I can imagine his childhood being told numerous times how he was conceived. You are a descendant of God. You are sent here to free the Israelites from the Philistines. Next slide. That's your job. So he's raised with this notion, and you can imagine, we've all had things that were seeds that were planted in our lives as we grew up, right? And we believed them wholeheartedly. Negative or positive, it didn't matter. We went for it. You know, that whole thing. And so in that process, Samson is believed to be the Savior. He's going to kill the Philistines. It's been planted in his mind and he's going to do it. Well, he does. But he also likes his drink, which was a disobedience to God. And he also likes his women. Samson is known for his women. And he idolized women. And being such a brute that he was, people were fearful of him as well. Whenever he didn't get his way, he'd kill a couple hundred Philistines. What, you know? But that was his job. He didn't see himself as a savior. He saw his job as simply any opportunity he can to kill a few Philistines. And it was never just a couple. So he's about to be married. And he has to give a dowry to get this woman. That's the way it was. He didn't have anything. He didn't have anything to give. So her family says, hey, you know, we'll waive it if you could help us with something. Now here's the thing, that although he's an Israelite, he has embedded himself in the Philistine life. Because that's all they knew. They're in captivity. They're slaves to the Philistines. But then there's this guy that just, and there's this guy, Samson, who's like, I don't mind captivity. I have all the women and drink I like. It's all good. So he falls in love and is about to get married, and he does a riddle. He gives her family a riddle. And if they can solve the riddle, he will give them 50 coats of armor. It's a big deal. Philistines like their armor. So as time goes on, his soon-to-be wife begs him for the solution to the puzzle, and he gives it to her. And then he discovers that she didn't keep the secret, and her kinsman knew the answer to the riddle. So he goes out, he kills 50 other Philistines, takes their armor, and gives it to them, because that was his agreement. Now, this is his first written episode of him not. This is his first of many episodes where women have betrayed him. And he's getting a reputation for it. It's just, you know. So he is operating on his sensual pleasures for everything he needs in his life. If he gets angry, he shoots out and kills out a bunch of Philistines. If he feels amorous, he goes and finds a woman. It's just, and he's a big eater, big drinker. There's nothing in small portions for Samson the Great. So anyway, fast forward, he falls in love again, and again, and again, and he's constantly killing Philistines for the process of being in sensual desire for a woman. So in comes Delilah. Never know, this is Delilah's story. Yeah. Do you want to know about Delilah? So we've heard songs about Delilah. And she is given, in the women back in that time, the way the Bible is written, it says, she was offered. There's no such thing. She was told, you need to do this. And if you do it, we'll pay you. And money meant everything. Equivalent to like $4,000 today. So she agrees to find the secret to his strength. Because the Philistines are never able to beat him. They are constantly losing to him. So he, next slide. She, uses her prowess with him and says, oh, come on, tell me where your strength comes from. And he's feeling a little jovial and has had a lot to drink, as usual. So he says to her, if you take 7 fresh bowstrings and tie them to my hair, I will lose my strength. So she's like, okay. So she creates these 7 fresh bowstrings and tries to relieve him of his strength. She wakes him up because he's always drunk and passed out. Wakes him up and says, hey, and he completely uses his strength to release himself from this bowstrings. Then she grabs him again and says, seriously, if you want sex with me, you're going to have to tell me how this works. And he says, if you tie 2 new ropes that have never been used for anything before, and tie them to my head, I will lose my strength. So she does that while he's sleeping or passed out. In the Judges, it's always about he's sleeping. Well, guess what? He ain't sleeping. He's passed out. There's no doubt in my mind reading it. Anyway, so she does this with the 2 new ropes. He breaks through it. It's all gone. Then she says, seriously, you keep lying to me. I want to know. You probably don't love me. That's it. You don't love me at all, right? How many of us have ever said that? If you loved me, you would only, right? So he says, if she gets 7 locks of his hair and weaves them together, he will lose his strength. So, of course, she does that. He wakes up. He has his strength. Now she really pulls it on strong. She is walking out. She's going to leave him unless he tells her exactly what's going on. And he does. Now, I don't know how many times you guys have to be fooled before you realize that the woman you're with is not being sincere, right? So in the meantime, he tells her. He tells her, all you have to do is shave my head, and I lose all my strength. So she calls the barber. He passes out. He gets his head shaved, and lo and behold, he doesn't have any strength. And in the meantime, she's pretty sure that he's telling her the truth now, so she calls in the Philistines. And they come and they capture him. He cannot win the battle. He's done for. And in the process, they poke his eyes out. Oh, how fun. Right? They want to punish him in some way. And so they poke his eyes out and they throw him in prison. Fast forward, his hair has grown back. He has repented in prison. He has recognized the error of his ways. And the fans in the arena, because they got to have fights, and so Samson's called out to be one of the warriors to show his strength. And his strength has returned because his hair has grown back. And he's repented. He's agreed to follow the wisdom and guidance of God. And he tells his captors, as he's being pulled out of prison, to go into the arena, put me underneath the pillars that hold the arena up so that I can be exalted. He does that. He's put in front of that. And with all of his strength, he pulls down what's holding the arena up. It completely collapses. 3,000 Philistines are killed, and Samson dies in the process. So the moral of the story is, let your hair grow, maybe. But really, it's about obedience and disobedience to God. Now, in our language today, we don't use the word disobedience. We say we're not following the guidance of God, right? Or we say we are following the guidance of God. And some people in history believe that the voices within them allow them to hurt other people following this guidance. And that's not our God. Our God never leads us into hurting somebody else. That is something else within us that is causing that to happen. So we have the Philistines, the Israelites, Samson, and Delilah. Back up one slide, please. We are all of these things. We represent some aspect of our spiritual being, represents all of this. The Philistines, let me actually read you something about this. The Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, I know some of you folks have that. Good stuff in there. If we are to understand the story, we must realize that it is not a historical incident, but a story that helps us understand something that goes on within our own consciousness. The Philistines are within us. The Israelites are within us. Samson is within us. Delilah is within us. They represent thoughts, feelings, beliefs, attitudes, habits, and practices that are very active in our own consciousness. There's another important point we must remember if we are to understand the theology of the Old Testament. It is a theme that is repeated over and over again. Obedience to the Lord, next slide. Obedience to the Lord brings blessings. Disobedience brings tragedy and captivity. And that's what the Israelites represent. Continually not following the guidance of God, but rather using their disobedience to acquire things that are not theirs and causing harm to other people. And because of these things are going bad for him, it's an indication that he's out of favor with God because of some violation of God's law. When we are in the zone and we are rolling it and we're following the wisdom and guidance of God, life is joyful. Life is abundant. We see only abundance. We say that we do affirmations and denials. That's critical for us. We have to deny that which does not work for us or that which takes us away from God. And it's up to us on our own spiritual journey to discover what that is. What things are we doing that is disobedient to God? And only we know that for ourselves, however that is unfolded. You see, because the Philistines represent the world of appearances, facts rather than intuition. You see, because I teach that God is that intuitive nature, that intuitive force within us that pushes us in a particular direction. And when we don't follow that intuition, because outer appearances tell us, oh, that's not possible. That could never happen to me. I'm not special. And we ignore it, and then we discover we have some aches and pains, or we're angry, or we're sad, more than that joy factor that can come through. And Delilah, of course, represents the pleasures of life. Now, some religions use these chapters, 13 through 16, to say that sex is bad. That's not what it's saying. Certainly not on a spiritual level. Sexual is an energy release. It's part of the nature of who we are. But like anything, it can become addictive. Alcohol, drugs, TV, shopping, all of these things can become addictive rather than putting them down and getting in touch with that entity within us that gently guides us. You see, because his eyes are plucked out because he has a loss of spiritual perception. A loss of spiritual perception. And it's up to us to stay firm in our time with God, our meditation and prayer time, because that's what keeps us in tune to knowing what is or what is not right for us. How many of us have ever stayed in relationships that we know are not healthy for us? Oh, but it's good for the kids, or my financial security, or what would the neighbors say? All that stuff. And that's outer appearances that we're allowing to move us rather than the intuitive nature, the wisdom and guidance of God to move us. When we believe with all of our heart, all of our mind, and all of our soul that where we're being guided by God will lead us to our highest and possible good, why would we ever say no to that? Because of fear. Because there's something underneath us that doesn't want to take that leap of faith, that movement, because it means I might have to blank, and you get to fill in the blanks. I may not feel well. I may not experience friendship. I may, all those stigmatism that are based on appearances rather than that part of us that is so in tune, because the principle of cause and effect is what Judges is all about. You cause something and there's an effect with it. And that is the number one underlying principle that unity teaches. It's cause and effect. Sometimes we call it law of mind action, but the cause and effect is because of us not following that wisdom, not doing enough prayer and meditation time, not willing to take that step forward in faith. Now, Emily Cady calls it blind faith, and I'm saying no, not blind faith, where we go whatever, but rather our intuitive faith that always moves us to something bigger and greater. You see, Samson, even in all of his outer appearances of doing all these things that are not necessarily healthy, in the end, he was obedient to God. And he got himself 3 chapters in the Old Testament because of it. He came around at the end. Even though he lost his life in it, he still came around to following that guidance. And I say, let's not wait till we're on death's door to say, hey, all right, God, I'll do that now. A little late, huh? We have today, now, to experience that guidance from God. Next slide. So we have this thing going on. Homework. You see, because if we're not willing to make some changes in our lives, we get to continue being not quite fully engaged in the guidance of God. When it's convenient, we follow it. When it's inconvenient, we go like, nah, maybe tomorrow's another day, right? But what would our lives be like if we genuinely followed the wisdom and guidance of God 24/7? Oh my God. We probably wouldn't be listening to CNN or Fox News. Just saying. Because isn't that a form of addiction? I noticed within me, and I've noticed it for a while, and I'm aware of it, so I'm less prone to doing it as often as I used to, but I still do it, which is I wake up in the morning and ask myself, gee, I wonder what happened overnight. Wow, huh? Wow. You know, so now I'm able to say, I wonder what good things happened overnight. Every once in a while that comes through. You know, but 9/11 shocked me. It embedded in me this unknown fear that I didn't know was there before. You know, and I have to dissipate that. I have to work at it. Because as if there's something I could do to manifest something different. So what is it? Think about how your decisions are based on your sensory thoughts, on your addictions. Because we all have something out there. You know, we could have that wonderful addiction that we need to know where our grandchildren are at all times. How many of you have that? Yeah. How many of you have those things on your phone where people know where you are? Because something might happen? You know? Yeah, I get it. That fear-based, that fear of the unknown and not knowing what's going to happen can really drive us to making decisions rather than being fearless or not living in fear of something negative happening. We all have this fear-based, fear of falling, whatever. And it's up to us to recognize that with God, that fear is not real. But our appearances and our sensories give us plenty of data to say that it is true. And then we start making decisions based on that untruth. Because fear is not true. Even if you can document how it only is for you because of the cause and effect within you. We are so prone to say, well, I'm just getting old. I know. You know, I have to cancel that thought all the time. I have this wonderful person in my life that is constantly reminding me that I'm going to turn 70. Shut up. You know, as if I don't know that. You know, and but I'm like, stop within me. Because appearances for them is what they're projecting onto me. I don't feel 70. I don't feel like I look 70, whatever that is, right? But when I get reminded like that, I go right back into that fear-based, oh, well, I only have a few more years left. Stop, right? Stop doing that to ourselves. What am I afraid of? You know, for a long time, and I still have it. I have a contract with God that I'm going to live to be 125 years old, healthy, alert, and enthusiastic about my life until that day. Well, why did I live it to 125? That's a little overthinking. You know, if I could achieve that in this lifetime, maybe the next time it'll be 150. My fears, let it reside. I don't have to have those things happen to me. You know, I wondered, my nutritionist said that, you know, Mo, you got some, you know, that does all that blood work and stuff. And I like going in that direction, although I remember when in the 70s, I had friends that were way out there, you know, the vegans, the nutritionists, and I went, well, I'm one of them now. And I recognize it, that it's only for me. I don't sit here and promote, you need to do, I don't do that. You have to be guided on your own self. So I see this nutritionist, she takes my blood and she really looks at it. And she said, for some reason in your blood you have a lot of pesticides. Pesticides? What the heck? And I started thinking about it. And I went, well, I'm on the golf course a lot. You know, there's a lot of pesticides there. You know, I mow my own lawn, there's a lot of pesticides. So she gave me this cleanser and all that stuff. I'm laying in bed, which is typical Saturday night. I don't sleep much Saturday nights because I have work to do. My mind is cooking on what it is I need to present. And I realized, oh my goodness, for the last 3 months, I've been in my backyard slowly, methodically pulling out the grass. I'm planting stuff. I want it to be this beautiful place, right? And so I finished a big patch yesterday, and then I went, oh, I always get this pain right here about 3 o'clock in the morning. And then my throat, then my eyes, and I went, oh my God, I'm sitting in pesticide. I've been sitting there for 90 days, and I'm expecting my body to be this brilliant thing. And I'm like, I think I'm gonna go buy one of those sod removers. You know, spend a little money and just get that project done. But I had to sit in the silence to hear that. I had to be within myself to say, I am open and receptive. Something's up. What is it? What can I do about it? Now, I could have gone to the doctor and they said, yeah, you got a lot of pesticides. I said, yeah, take this 2 times a day, morning and afternoon, and you'll feel better. Masking the problem rather than resolving the problem. You guys know what I mean. So my homework for me is to find a way to release those pesticides in my body, because I've been poisoning myself little by little. You know, and then I'll die of some pancreatic thing or whatever, right? So if I say I want to live to be 125, I must also do what it takes to get there. You see? So what are you affirming, standing firm in your faith about that? And then are you willing to do what it takes to achieve it? That's the real homework. We had a talk not long ago about consciousness, subconscious, and superconsciousness. You know, this is a conscious thought. This is a conscious decision that you're saying to yourself, what is it I'm in fear of, and is it false belief? What can I do to turn it around to see that God is my truth? And if I do the guidance of God, I not only am obedient to God, I'm happier, I'm healthier, I'm more whole. And to discount and allow the disillusion of our untruths to fade away. Be the one that's whacked out there. That says, oh man, she's a lunatic. But boy, she looks happy. Without drugs, without alcohol, without all those other stuff, right? To live a fully engaged life that is filled with joy. And that's our real question. That's the homework. What can you learn from the decisions that you've made? Rather than, oh, well, that's how I was back then. No, why? You know, do the homework saying, you know, I made that decision. It didn't bring me pleasure. What was I doing to avoid following the guidance of God? And you'll get an answer, and then you can shift on a conscious level and pull from your superconsciousness a new way to be. Just in that one incident, just keep moving in the direction of changing your mind so that appearances are not what's guiding you, but rather the inner guidance. And do that with joy in your heart, because it's going to lead you to something wonderful. And if we can trust that and have faith that it is the perfect outpouring, it's a beautiful experience. And that's what you can share with others. And they'll say, I want what she has. And that's a good thing. And so it is. Amen. Amen.